Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Pilipinx in Wellness. We will be approaching Season 3, Episode 11, interviewing Professor Janet Stickmon about healing racial battle fatigue. What is racial battle fatigue, racism-related stress, and how can her program, CenterJoyPWR, be an incredible tool to help you through racism-related stress, colorism, and even microaggressions experienced by our community. We hope that you enjoy this episode. Maayong adlaw. Welcome back to Season 3 of Pilipinx in Wellness. I am your host, Cheryl Sampson Ramirez. Following our last episode on self-care astrology with Marcia Pacificar, we will be talking with wellness consultant, professor of ethnic studies at Napa Valley College and author, Janet Stickmon. As mentioned in previous episodes, all views discussed are for informational and educational purposes only. It is not meant to be medical advice. Always consult with your healthcare practitioner for your particular condition, especially before starting any exercise or new health program. For this episode, I'd like to welcome Professor Janet Stickmon. Welcome to the podcast, Professor Janet Stickmon.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Pleasure being here. Thank you for having me.
We're grateful to have you here as well. We typically like to open our episodes asking where both sides of your family are from and where are you currently streaming from?
Okay, so I identify as Black Apina. I'm a biracial woman of African-American and Filipino-American heritage. And my mom is Filipino, and she's from the barangay of Labangon in Cebu. And my dad is African-American. He's from Shreveport, Louisiana. I'm currently streaming from Richmond, California, the unceded territory of the Ohlone and Miwok people.
Awesome. Shout out to all the Visayans out there and also to all the biracial folks in our community representing dual identity and multiple identities. So we're happy to have you all, listening in, watching, or just being on our podcast. So the title of our episode is Healing Racial Battle Fatigue. This episode was aired purposefully in February during Black History Month because, in my opinion, Black or African Americans were at the forefront of addressing racism within this country, speaking to the U.S. or Turtle Island, depending on who you ask. And it really opened up many doors for other ethnic groups, including our Pilipinx or Filipino community. What exactly, Janet, is racial battle fatigue, and what does racism-related stress look like?
Okay, so racial battle fatigue is a term that was coined by Dr. William A. Smith out of the University of Utah, and it's a term used to describe the physiological, behavioral, and psychological strain that's experienced by people of color as we fight against and deal with racism. In a talk that Dr. Smith had given last year, he also described it as a systemic racism-related repetitive stress injury. And I thought that was a really nice and concise way of really capturing what we're looking at here. Essentially, when we're looking at racial battle fatigue, it is a combination of these intertwined stress responses, again, physiological, psychological, and behavioral. If we looked at just a couple of examples of what those stress responses look like, say, for example, when we're looking at the physiological stress responses, it would be anything from chest pain to sleep disturbances to teeth grinding to gastrointestinal problems. Then when we look at behavioral examples, there would be withdrawing from others, being quick to get angry, and then psychological, anywhere from anxiety, worry, fear, and being hypervigilant. And I think one of the interesting things about racial battle fatigue is that, despite that term fatigue, oftentimes when people hear that term, they think, oh, it's just exhaustion, it's just being tired. And it's far more than that. It is, the ways in which we experience racism-related stress and the kind of toll it takes on our physical and our mental wellness.
Thank you for defining that. And I'm glad that you touched on the different ways that it manifests in our bodies, because I know, especially for many communities of color, they may not have outlets or ways to really express the stress they're feeling. Talk therapy is not really a popular thing amongst many communities of color for various reasons, right? Distrust with institutional systems historically, right? And so when we see these things manifesting, like, for example, in chest pain or physiologically in our bodies, it's also the result of an internalization of, right, compounded and complex stress that many of our communities experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And oftentimes, we may have a habit of just ignoring some of these signs. We think, oh, okay, my chest hurts. I'm just going to rest a little bit. Let me just sit down. Or we may be so used to some of these physical indicators that we just continue to go about our business and not really give it a second thought. Or we may end up thinking, oh, okay, yeah, it's due to stress, but we don't realize, well, there are all these everyday stressors. And then there's the stress that, we experience due to, racial microaggressions and macroaggressions. And we don't realize that it is slowly kind of chiseling away at our health.
Yes. So when you talk about like micro or macroaggressions, how would you define that, for those of our community that maybe are trying to discern whether they're experiencing these things?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. Thank you, Cheryl. When looking at microaggressions, these are the things that are said or done, whether they're intentional or unintentional, verbal, nonverbal, and they ultimately communicate this negative message that targets people based on the marginalized group that they might be from. And there can be all types of microaggressions, whether they are racial, gender, sexuality, class-based. And in our case, looking at, racial microaggressions, perhaps some examples might be when someone says, oh, you're smart for being Black, or, you don't get mad all the time like other Black people, or, oh, I'm surprised you speak good English for being Asian, all these sorts of things. And what's interesting is that oftentimes the person who is saying or engaging in the use of that microaggression, there's a part of them that thinks that they're paying the person a compliment when really there's this underlying negative message that's being communicated. And one of the things that I share with my students when talking about microaggressions is that it oftentimes leaves the person feeling almost as though they don't know whether they've been kicked or kissed. And so sometimes there's this ambivalence about, well, how do I react? That maybe they were just trying to be nice and then blah, blah, blah. They were a little bit awkward about it. Should I say something? Should I not say something? And all of that back and forth requires energy. And the fact that you were feeling some kind of way about it really speaks volumes to how hurtful and harmful that statement or that action was.
See, yeah. And for many of our oppressed or colonized communities, just being able to challenge authority can be really difficult for various reasons, whether historically, they've been silenced in various ways, or maybe even within their culture, they were taught not to speak against authority. We're seeing the manifestations of this through racial battle fatigue. So I'm really glad and feeling really grateful and thankful to have you on this podcast to just really talk about that and how it's really manifesting in what we see maybe through our own health and wellness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, so Janet, I want to know more about your origin story. So, what led you to this work? Was there a particular event or series of events that led up to your decision in wanting to focus on healing racial battle fatigue?
Yes, I basically all of this work that I do around healing racial battle fatigue traces its origins to my own personal experience of dealing with racial battle fatigue before I even realized what it was called. Um, for many years, I was coming up against, resistance when it came to developing ethnic studies curriculum. I was dealing with oppressive administrators. I was also, um, as a parent, defending my child against some of the racial and gender microaggressions she was experiencing in school. And so all of this really built up. And around, let's see, I think it was around 2016, I was experiencing chest pains. And I went to the emergency room. They took all these tests, and luckily all the tests came out normal. And, I talked to the doctor. He was happy to give me those results, but I was confused because I knew the pain in my chest was real. I knew the heart palpitations, all of that was real. And, I turned to the doctor. I said, well, I'm happy that the results came out normal, but what do you attribute the chest pain to? And he looked at me and he said, so how's work? And I just burst into tears. I burst into tears. And right then and there, I realized, okay, there's my answer. And after that conversation with that doctor in the ER, I was referred to a new primary care doctor. And it was then that I was able to really hash out some of the things that I was experiencing. And I was very fortunate to have a doctor who asked me, so what do you do for fun? And I did not know how to answer that question. I was sitting there thinking, well, uh, I saw myself for many years. I saw myself as a fun person. I'm a fun person. I do fun things. And yet when posed with the question, I didn't know how to answer. I did not know how to answer it. And that was another indication that I had really neglected just something as simple as doing fun things, integrating fun things into my life. And for that week, in addition to making sure he connected me with a therapist and made sure I had all these other resources available to me, he gave me homework. He said, this week, I want you to do something fun. And that was the start of my healing process. And though he didn't use this term, I grew to understand fun and joy as something that I could integrate into my daily life as if it were a vitamin, thinking of joy as a daily vitamin. I think up until that point, I was always thinking of play and fun and joy being all these things that I would have to forego until I got all the work done. Once all the work is done, okay, then I'll do something fun. Then I'll treat myself. But I mean, the thing is, as a professor, and really, and I think this applies to a number of fields across the board. The work is never done. There's always work, and I think I lost sight of that. And in an effort to get everything done and be responsible and be reliable in the eyes of my colleagues and all these sorts of things, I lost sight of what it meant to have fun. And I was so grateful to that doctor that reminded me and set me on this path of centralizing fun in my life, that it needed to be a path toward my wellness and needed to be at the center of my health.
Yeah, you bring up so many interesting topics that come to the forefront in your response. I mean, I'm thinking about definitely my parents, as you speak, and also just myself and many other people that I know, where work is centered and joy and fun are placed, as secondary, just because, especially if you're growing up in a working class family, or maybe like an immigrant family, or family of color. Work is the priority, right? It's a way to rise out of maybe your economic situation that you might be experiencing, and even generationally, especially thinking about maybe my parents' generation, who grew up mainly in like the 50s or the 60s, right? They were older. They had to prioritize work.
Yes.
There was no such thing as even thinking outside of that box, right? And a lot of times culturally, we also think about putting others first before ourselves.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Yeah. Work is a necessity. Um, and, to put ourselves first, or to put our own needs, or to put something, put fun at the top of our list of priorities, uh, is something I know that my parents, never explicitly, entertained. It was always, they were definitely working. There was fun woven in, but I think what was so clear to me is that, um, work had to be done because we needed to survive. When I look at, other relatives, and then, friends of mine, students of color in particular, indeed, the idea of, um, putting oneself at the top of our list of priorities is often at times viewed as selfish. And so the term self-care ends up being a very new term for many of us, because it's almost impossible to make a distinction between self-care and self-centeredness.
Mm.
And so one of the things that I like to do with my students and my clients as well is, understand how self-care, and I include fun and joy being part of that self-care in our path toward wellness, that it's an act of self-compassion. And if we want to uh, be generous with our time, generous with our attention when it comes to nurturing others, we have to fill our own well. We have to extend that compassion that we extend to everyone else. We have to extend that compassion toward ourselves.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that when we move towards acts of self care or different practices, sometimes initially there's a sense of guilt that comes from it, where we maybe, we don't feel that we're deserving of that,
Yeah,
right?
so true.
And then even so, it's these patterns that we are experiencing are usually habits that are passed down from generation to generation.
Mhm.
So we become, used to the habits that we saw in our parents. And not only are we inheriting these habits, but we're also inheriting their trauma,
Mhm.
right? There's that concept of intergenerational trauma, and also the term of epigenetics, right? How things get passed down genetically. And
Mhm.
sometimes we may be experiencing these physiological responses, or these biological, psychological responses, and not necessarily know where they're rooted.
Yes, yeah,
Right.
that is, it's so true. I think that, just backing up to your first point about guilt, this is something that I encounter day in and day out, whether it's with my students at the college level or with my clients in various professions, that even though there is this desire to reconnect with joy and do fun things and really savor those good things that enter one's life, at the same time, there is this initial resistance. There is that guilt. Is it okay for me to have fun when so many other people are going hungry or are going without or experiencing some kind of scarcity or deprivation? Is it okay for me to have fun and enjoy and savor this good thing because I feel like something bad is about to happen? And I really I have learned so much, especially from the work of Dr. Mario Martinez. He is the author of the Mind Body Code, and he talks about abundance and what it means to raise your ceilings of abundance. And one of the things that I find interesting is, as he defines in his definition of abundance, this is something that I integrate in my program. He talks about abundance being the amount of health, wealth, and love that you require in order to lead a joyful life. And when one lives a life of deprivation or scarcity in any of those areas, that over time they get used to that scarcity and get used to that deprivation, to the point where when something good does enter their life, it is experienced with a stress response. And there's either guilt or there's fear or there's some kind of, stress that's felt somewhere throughout the body. And it becomes so necessary. I've had to learn this in my own personal life, and this is something that I've shared with others as well, how important it is to breathe in to those good things that enter our lives, to really sit with those things and recognize where the stress, where we're holding the stress in our bodies, so that we can get to a point where we release it, so we don't end up engaging in self-sabotage when it comes to the good things that enter our lives. We don't end up pushing that good thing out just because it's foreign, just because it's not familiar. So, yeah.
I'm also kind of thinking about how the costs of some wellness activities can really intimidate, especially like communities of color that are just used to maybe seeking self-care practices that can sometimes be self-destructive or maladaptive, right? So like we've had episodes on like substance use disorder, or, for example, where maybe someone might equate substances or substance abuse, or which can lead to substance abuse in some cases, as a way to relieve their stress, and maybe see something, for example, like as yoga, as not something that is for me because that's for maybe someone that is white or has money or can afford to do that. So, I'm going to try to seek something that is more familiar and not as expensive, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah, I see that. I see that as well. Time and time again, if I offer as a solution, or as an option, physical exercise, signing up in for a gym membership or yoga membership or what have you. A number of times I would hear, "Oh, that's not for me. That's for white folks. That's what white folks do. I'm going to do this over here, or I'm going to, I smoke. I smoke to relieve stress, and it works for me. And whenever I do exercises with particularly some of my college students, and do some brainstorming around what are some ways in which we can take care of ourselves, or what are some healthy rewards we can give to ourselves when, let's say, we finish working toward, a particular step in completing a project. What are some healthy rewards? I have to be conscious about integrating the word healthy, because if I don't, I'll get smoking. I'll get, okay, I'm just going to get wasted on the weekend and I'll feel better after that.
Yeah.
I don't think, individuals that may respond in that way, they may not fully realize the long-term effects, that they aren't beneficial, though they may have heard, oh yeah, drugs are not good for me, it's not good for me to drink, but they haven't really internalized what kind of real lived impact that will have on their mental and physical health.
Right. Or maybe shopping makes them feel better, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to change gears a little bit and just kind of come back to talking about, Janet, how do you feel your biracial identity influences your work? Or how do you feel like it plays a role in what you do?
Okay, let's see. I'll maybe talk a little bit first about my journey and understanding my biracial identity, and then I'll move into how it's found its way in my work. How's that sound?
That sounds great.
So as I mentioned earlier, I'm Black and Filipino. Mom from Cebu, dad from Shreveport, Louisiana. I grew up being amongst... I grew up in Lancaster, California. I really did not know of anyone else at school that was Black and Filipino. I know that my mom had a dear friend who was also Cebuano, was also married to a man who was African American, and also had a biracial child. And so we grew up. We were just a few years apart, but we grew up as playmates. And I was glad that we had each other growing up, because otherwise I would have thought I was the only Black Apina kid on the face of the earth, had it not been for this other, basically we now think of each other as siblings. But I think that was the beginning of me really having my identity affirmed when I didn't really completely know it. I wasn't completely aware of it. I remember having a lot of struggles around what it meant to be both, and feeling at times not feeling, quote, Black enough, at times not feeling Filipino enough. And so there were all these ideas that I was coming up against when it came to authenticity and what exactly that meant. And wanting to be whole, and over, a certain number of years, I became really tired of identifying as half Black and half Filipino, because I felt fragmented, and I was really longing for a chance to feel whole. And eventually I found myself, after, learning more and more about my Black side, learning more and more about my Filipino side, I found myself identifying as 100% Filipino, 100% Black, and not identifying as these fractions. And, later on, around 2007, I identified as Black Apina. This was inspired by two scholars whose work I learned quite a bit from at a conference. I think it was the Loving Conference in 2007 in Chicago. Rudy Guevara, who had coined the term, at least in literature, Mexipino, and then Rebecca Romo, the term Blaxican. And it was nice to hear and read these terms and know that there was no laughter surrounding the terms, that these terms were meant to be serious. They were meant to really signify an experience of biraciality that was distinct. And it was around that time that I realized, you know what, there is no shame in identifying as Black Apina, using a blended term. I think up until that time, I was very hesitant because I never wanted to be seen as a diluted version or a counterfeit version of, someone who was Black, or a counterfeit or diluted version of someone who was Filipino or Filipino American. And that was the idea that I had if I would consider using a blended term. But there was something about their work. And not to mention also Susan Lexander, she had done some work around something called psychosynthesis, really kind of integrating one's various sub-personalities into this integrating I, and really holding all of those things in tension and in joy. And I learned to love both sides and be at home with both sides, and also be at home in the in-between space, and seeing that in-between space as sacred and beautiful, and a place out of which creative solutions come, because I'm living at the intersection. And had I not been born in this intersection of identities, I wouldn't be trying to make sense of some of the different things that I encounter in life. And so fast forward to now and this work, I'm very grateful for my biracial experience, because it has helped inform my ideas about wholeness, my desire for wholeness, and nuance. I think there's a particular attention that I give to nuance, and again, the beauty of liminality, and being in an in-between space that perhaps otherwise may be a little more uncomfortable. So, yeah.
Yes. And so, based on what you do, this has really influenced the work that you're offering to others as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And how do you begin to also explain your work to your family members? Do you find this to be an easy or a challenging process when they ask you what you're doing for a living?
Sometimes, I enjoy conversations with my family. I'm really close to cousins on my Filipino American side, and my brother, and sisters, and nieces and nephews. And, if it comes up in conversation, then, I'll share a little bit about it. I try not to get into too much detail, only because sometimes it could become boring. So I just don't get into too much detail, unless there are some questions that are asked, some specific questions about, so what is racial battle fatigue? And, that sounds familiar. Does this mean, fill in the blank? And so if I get some kind of indication that there's some curiosity about a specific term, then I'll go into more detail. Other than that, I'll just go into broad strokes. And to be honest, I'm fine with it. No one really. I find that both sides of my family have really embraced me as a woman, as a biracial woman, and as a professor. I think that there was this, concern that me being a professor would separate me from the family. I never wanted my family to ever think that I thought of myself as better than, or more intelligent than my family members, because of my formal education, because, being a professor and whatnot. So it's not so much that I withhold information about my profession, but it's something that I want to make sure that as I talk about my work, I also really, really listen to the wisdom that is in my family. and the wisdom that they have gained through their variety of experiences, whether it be from the workplace or just life. And so, does that answer your question?
Yes, I was just wondering, like, if it's easy, basically, for your family to understand what you do, or how do you navigate around that, especially maybe because there might be varying viewpoints towards race, right? Or even understanding that depending on different family members. I mean, sometimes people in the same family don't agree with viewpoints or perspectives on that.
True. Yeah. I mean, luckily for the most part, when it comes to race, on both sides of my family, we have similar politics, and so I don't have there isn't as much resistance to the things that the work that I do. On the other hand, if I were to get into it deeper, perhaps some of the disagreements could surface. To be honest, it hasn't been that important to me to get into more detail than what I've already shared with them.
All right, we're going to take a pause. Thank you all for joining us for our 11th episode of Season 3. I'm talking with wellness practitioner, professor, and author Janet Stickmon. Feel free to take a quick stretch, refill your water or tea. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to Pilipinx in Wellness. You were just listening to the Hear It From You instrumental by Freddie Joachim, released in 2018 off of his In With Time album Through Mellow Orange. Freddie Joachim is a California native music producer, DJ, avid listener, and collector of music. You can find his music on all digital platforms, and we'd like to thank Freddie for consent to use his track in this episode. Shout out to our Pilipinx artists and musicians out there laying down the tracks. Returning from our break, I'm talking with Professor Janet Stickmon about healing racial battle fatigue. Now, Janet, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on our podcast is because of colorism and microaggression that I have personally often experienced and witnessed within our Filipino community and also within my own family, right? So colorism, as we know, textbook and microaggressions within our community are a direct result not only of colonialism and imperialism within the Philippines, but also racism experienced throughout our diaspora globally as a result of this. And when I was really crafting this episode and thinking about how it affected my own experience of wellness, I thought back to some of the experiences that I've had growing up. I can think to one example in particular where, as a child, I used to sit in front of the sliding door that separated our house from our backyard. And I used to sit in front of it because it was a glass door where the sun shined through. And I loved to just sunbathe literally as a child, just feeling the warmth of the sun against my skin. And there was one instance where I remember my mom, who was half Chinese, had asked me to, stop sitting in front of the glass window because she didn't want me to get dark like my dad. And my dad presented as he is now passed, but my dad presented as more of a brown skin, a Filipino man who had some Spanish in him. But I remember his response and reaction as he was reading the paper. He stopped and he got offended by the remark that my mom said, and it stirred up this argument. And I remember asking her what she meant by that. And she was like, well, look at your dad, he's dark. He wasn't like that before. And I remember asking her well, why did she think that my dad was darker, right, or brown? And she said, well, I think it's from all the time that he spent working in the fields. And I just started to notice kind of this status thing that she was trying to exert, or these colonial behaviors, for example, remarking that she liked how fair my skin was, or my aunts would make those comments, right? And how good it was that I was fair skinned, or my mom would pinch my nose and just kind of say she's fortunate that I inherited my dad's Spanish kind of looking nose because it wasn't as flat as hers, right? There was this self-hatred that came from being darker skin or having a flatter nose. And I remember there was also one instance where I was at a family party with my parents, and I also have family members or family friends that have part Spanish in them, right, or are half Spanish. And my husband, who was my partner at the time, my boyfriend at the time, came over with me. He is Ilocano and Bantagueño, so he has darker skin. And at the time, he was wearing his hair in dreadlocks. And I remember an aunt saying just out loud, no shame at all, he had a wrap around his dreadlocks. And she said, why is his hair like that? Is he a terrorist? And she tried to just crack this joke, which neither of us found funny. We found it offensive, but then I remember also just kind of seeing my mom looking really embarrassed by that comment, and just resenting my husband, my boyfriend at the time, for having that appearance, And these are just many of the situations that I've encountered, and just sometimes being around family members or friends that would just make these racialized jokes around, Black people, feeling that that's okay and not knowing how to respond. So I just wanted to name these instances just because these are just different experiences that I felt growing up, not fully knowing how to advocate for people that I consider soul family or my loved ones, because I've been taught or raised not to challenge my parents or challenge their views or authorities. And within all of this, I think it's really affected not only my personal wellness, but those around me, right? So I want to talk about, my question for you is, how can we talk about colorism and microaggressions and how these types of experiences or instances can contribute to racial battle fatigue and racism-related stress within our community?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that question, Cheryl. And truly thank you for sharing your experience, because that basically illustrates, what colorism looks like. When we um, look at how we have this kind of value we assign to blackness and whiteness, value that we assign to darkness and lightness, and the ways in which communities of color have over time internalized white supremacy and this placing of premium on white and light skin and assigning it the meaning of good and clean and better and desirable, civilized, you name it, innocence, beautiful. And then when it comes to brown or black or darker skin, we assign the meaning to it as being bad or dirty and primitive, being ugly, undesirable, or just seeing the person as suspect, really associating them with criminality or just thinking the worst of the person. And like you mentioned, we certainly see this in the Filipino and Filipino American community. I've seen it in my own family growing up, and I think, as far as my own experience, I have had some family members on my Filipino side really be, especially as a teenager, express either envy for my dark skin, or in comparison to theirs, or there was this silent contempt for my hair texture and equating my hair, let's say if they saw my hair in the tub, expressing a level of disgust and really explicitly, associating it with pubic hair, that kind of disgust. And so, and I mentioned hair, in conjunction with colorism, because oftentimes, hair texture bias or hair texturism, goes hand in hand with colorism. And it's something that is, at the very least, deeply frustrating, and most certainly a source that can contribute to the conditions that create racial battle fatigue. I know the other day we were talking about, just looking at this whole, industry of skin whitening creams and soaps that we have. And some of the examples that you had shared earlier when it comes to now being encouraged to stay in the sun too long. I've heard a number of my students say that, or sometimes family members. Oh, we don't want to be in the sun too long. We don't want to get dark. We don't want to get too dark. And my question was always, well, why not? What's so wrong with that? Or sometimes some of our elders being preoccupied with, if someone has given birth, being very preoccupied with, how dark or light the child is when they've come out of the womb. And so, these being just a couple of examples, I think other examples being the ways in which, especially, in our families, we may see those who are lighter skinned folks being favored more than the darker skinned members of the family, or if there are lighter skinned mixed race members of the family, that they're favored over the darker skinned mixed race members in various ways, or again, sometimes assuming the worst out of the darker skinned members of the family, whether it be suspecting ill intent or them being associated with criminality or lack of intelligence or what have you, that this is associated with their skin color. And so the bottom line is, all these things that are said and done as it relates to colorism, and, I'll add hair texture bias or texturism, is that it hurts.
Yeah.
That's these are, microaggressions. They hurt, they cause harm, and they create stress in the people who are targets of these things, whether it be intentional or unintentional. It is the person who has to sit with the burden of hearing that thing or dealing with that thing, that, again, it's this accumulation of stress due to these various microaggressions that create the conditions for racial battle fatigue. And I think we really just have to, I think it is important for us as a community to raise our awareness about these various microaggressions. And, whether it be, within the Filipino American community, or just looking at society at large. And if we're looking at those who are in the, if we're looking at the matrix of oppression and any group that might be in that column of dominance, the dominant group versus the targeted or marginalized group, that if anyone, finds themselves in that dominant group, depending on that system of oppression, there's a certain responsibility to really put some work into raising our unconscious biases to the level of consciousness, so that they don't turn into microaggressions that could then ultimately cause harm to folks in that targeted group, in that target group, in that marginalized group. What can be done to bring that to an end so that the hurt stops? And so I bring this up because, when it comes to my work around racial battle fatigue, I specialize in, creating healing spaces for people of color.
Right.
And I think, like, in the larger scheme of things, the work I do is only one part of the puzzle. That another part of it involves, well, what needs to take place in one's environment? How do we change one's environment so that the racism stops, the cause of the racial battle fatigue stops, or at least is mitigated in some way. So
yeah. I mean, it sounds, there's so many different things, right, that contribute to racial battle fatigue. I mean, and ultimately, I'm glad that you just named it for what it was. It's hurtful. And when we hear these messages generationally, it creates a sense of self-hatred that's really hard to cycle out of for many people, right? Because no matter what you look like, at some point you're starting to feel like this deficit of, maybe you're not light enough, maybe your nose isn't straight enough, maybe your hair doesn't look a certain way because of this idealized standard of beauty that was created by a certain colonizer, right? Or that is promoted more through media and through pop culture. And so we often see, folks in our community wanting to straighten their hair, wanting to get those Brazilian blowouts. And so I'm just grateful that we actually had a guest on another episode of ours, Sherry Young, who has also Black Filipino kids. And one of the things that she talked about was really promoting an acceptance in folks being able to wear their hair curly, to wear their hair wavy, and own that as an extension of their beauty. So I think having those episodes are just as important in working through, racialized related stress, or even, racial battle fatigue.
Yeah. I absolutely love that.
Now, I want to talk about your website, Janet, CenterJoyPWR. So it's spelled PWR. Does the PWR stand for power, or does it stand for something else?
So in CenterJoyPWR, yes, the PWR, it stands for a couple of things. When we read CenterJoyPWR all together, the intent was to have people kind of come away with the sense that when we center our joy, that is our power. So there's a power in centering our joy. So that's one part of it. The second part of it is that, yes, PWR in and of itself stands for play to work ratio. And this is something that is at the heart of my program, where I encourage the participants to embrace a commitment to playing more than they work throughout the week. And so this play to work ratio being greater than 1, meaning that ultimately, can we get to a place, or what does it look like if we find ourselves playing more than we work throughout the rest of the day or the week or what have you? And that's where that joy as daily vitamin concept comes in as well. And so, yeah, I think that given the work ethic, especially, in the United States, there is a lot of value that is placed on how, what exactly we learn about ourselves through our work, as if we cannot learn as much about ourselves through our leisure or through play. And that's one of the things that I really want to bring back, this idea of, well, what if we spent more time in leisure? What would our lives look like? What would we find out about ourselves? What are some ways in which we might find liberation from play and answers to certain things that work can't answer? Solutions that work can't really provide. And one of the things that I've found, especially through the various things I've been involved with, is that play really allows this sense of curiosity and surrender and novelty to come through. And it's really something important that is a necessity, not just something that is nice to do, but we don't really need it. Truly, it is important for us to remain healthy and well.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful that based on your own experiences, your, physiological, uh, you know, condition and experiences that came from the stress that you're feeling at work, that you've developed this program, not only just as a response to what you were dealing with, but also to offer that as a tool for others. I'd like to ask you, what types of services and strategies are you offering through CenterJoyPWR? Like, I love the idea of this balance that's coming forth through the play to work ratio. So through your program, what can one expect?
So basically, CenterJoyPWR Strategies for Healing Racial Battle Fatigue is an online experience that consists of 6 modules, 6 weekly modules. And throughout the 6-week program, we walk through ways in which we can first identify and define what is joy and what does that look like for us and feel like for us. And then also name racial battle fatigue and racism related stress, and what does that look like for us, and how can we arrive at a place where we can have free ourselves from those things that are causing us so much pain and so much heaviness. And as we are walking through this process, and ultimately, I'm equipping the participants with a self-care plan and a set of rituals to help remind themselves of the importance of reconnecting with joy on a regular basis, that there are various things that I pull from. So as far as the strategies, I pulled from what has worked in my own personal life, but most certainly pulled from the research that I've done in terms of various disciplines, whether it be neuroscience or mindfulness or ethnic studies, psychoneuroimmunology or sports medicine, and really kind of bringing all these things together and giving the participants a space to really engage in a healing process, understanding that joy is not just something nice to feel and experience, but it is a central part of one's wellness, that we can't just simply carve out space for joy. We have to prioritize it if we want to be well and move beyond healing.
Totally agree. I know as you're speaking, I also think about this Instagram account that I follow called Nap Ministry. I'm not sure if you're familiar. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And for lack of a better term, I think it's a revolutionary thing, right? To really highlight and center, as well as your work of centering what joy looks like. Because stuff like rest is a revolutionary act, right? And for some people, like I'll say, like for myself, I love to nap. Napping brings me joy, right? And so that's one of the reasons why I follow Nap Ministry. And I think similarly, what you're offering to many individuals is just revolutionary in itself, to really think about and switch your mind frame to what is bringing you joy authentically. Maybe, we've really maybe operated in paradigms where we have to really think about how much emphasis and energy we place in our work, and how much that defines us. But through listening to you, you're also really bringing out how not only does work have to define you, but how does your leisure time define you? How does your play and your joy also define you? And what can you discover within that process?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it's so very important. I think it's something that, many of us don't really give a second thought to. I've come across a number of clients that may be good at doing fun things, or they're good at integrating into their lifestyle structured exercise, but sometimes it may just be done to relieve stress. It's done for the sake of something else. It's something that one does to escape from work, or to relax after work, or to recharge in order to have energy to be better on the job. And I'll speak my own personal experience too. And one of the things that I found very freeing, especially, during the pandemic, is that I found that I was engaging in the things that I love for the sheer enjoyment of the activity itself. And it was an entirely different feel. I was like, oh, okay. And it's not that I stopped working. I was still working, but work was no longer center stage. I could actually see the activity for what it was, or see the human beings whose company I was enjoying. I could see it for what it was. It wasn't a stepping stone to help me be better on the job, or to relieve stress after the job. So yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, no, I'm internalizing what you're saying, because probably, once you discover what other activities in your life can bring you joy or fulfillment, you'll find that same joy and fulfillment will start to permeate into your job, right?
Yes. Yes.
will start to change your outlook on your job.
Yes, it certainly does. And if I may add,
Yeah, please.
That was precisely the experience that I had with parkour. And I think it was maybe my second year, sometime in my second year of doing parkour, I found, it's probably one of the hardest things I've ever tried to do. And, and I'm by no means, when I say I train in parkour, right now I'm recovering from an injury. And so I'm hoping to return in the next couple of months. But when I say I do parkour, I'm not like, some of the more advanced people, especially like my coaches that are flipping off of things and on the top of roofs and just flipping and flipping. I stay close to the ground. I do what I can within my own within my own reach, but nonetheless, still has been a good challenge for me. And I've been able to challenge my fear, particularly my fear of heights. And one of the things that I learned is that by jumping over different obstacles or engaging in a step vault or or a parkour roll or whatever it may be, is that you can't pretend. You can't pretend to make it over an obstacle. You can't pretend to do a move without sufficient practice or, progressions to that move. And if you do attempt to pretend, you're going to hurt yourself or you're going to hurt someone else. And I think learning those lessons within the context of parkour very much spilled over into my work life, and I found it so very healing. I think something else that I found really healing and surprising is that in that particular gym, for the most part, it was young men that were training during the open practice session, and I was one of the few women at training, and let alone one of the few at that time. When I started, I was in my late 40s, and now I'm 50. But I felt like, I was like, well, what am I doing here? I'm and also, amongst the few people of color. But, as a woman, I discovered how self-conscious I was about the amount of space I would take up. And I found that I was constantly moving out of people's way. And I think particularly my coach, I think he noticed it and was like, Janet, you're good. Janet, you're good. Or if some of the other people who were training during the open practice session, they may ask, particularly men, they would ask, am I in your way? Oh, I'm sorry, I'll get out of your way. Was I in your way? And I was floored, because never in my experience in academia, whether it be as a high school teacher or as a college professor, have I ever had a man ask if they were in my way, or ever say, no, you don't have to move, instead having them move around me. And yet that happened at the gym in, a predominantly male space. And so I think there's a lot to be said about the respect level that is there, and the level of sportsmanship, and just there's I don't know if there's any unconscious training that has been done amongst the staff, but the respect when it comes to women practicing parkour most certainly is evident, and that's something also that I found very healing. And I didn't even know. I mean, it's kind of fascinating how you don't realize what kind of wounds you have until somebody, says, hey, you're good, or, gives you, extends to you some kind of warm gesture. Then you realize what kind of void was there to begin with. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, who knows? Right now, you're probably just getting some folks in our community that are really intrigued now and want to explore parkour themselves, right? Or you probably have other folks also in our community that are that you've just affirmed and say, "Yep, that's why I do parkour for that same very reason." You know, something, Janet, that I find fascinating is part of this work of really exploring joy and fulfillment in our lives to balance that work, right? That play to work ratio is also looking at how typically most people look for advancement in their career or vertical movement, climbing up the ladder, ascension, however you want to call it, to make more money so that they can create more opportunities for fulfillment. And this is not to just anyone that wants to advance in their career, but there's also some times when you make those moves that you have less time to make, you know, for that balance, that you know, play to work ratio, or there's more time and stress that comes from that, right? And I think what's interesting is when you are creating more room for play in your life, for fulfillment, you're also making now these what I envision as these lateral moves, kind of rather than looking at it as an upward move. How can you also kind of create all these other things with what you're currently doing to expand horizontally, like as I imagine it, like visually. So I just am just, you know, floored by also that realization of thinking about how can you expand your life rather than always having to really think about how can you rise vertically to make those moves and make that happen.
Yeah. And I think that what you've touched upon is this is so very important because I mean it's it's so common that many of us, you know, professionals will make decisions to um will make professional decisions that we think will allow us the resources to have more leisure, and then, like you said, we discover that it is at the expense of our free time, and that it doesn't yield the results that we expected. And one of the things that I like to encourage folks to do, especially like clients that come up against this sort of thing, is really to take stock of uh, those decisions and if it is yielding the results that they expected. And if it's not, what kind of pivoting do they need to do in their professional life so that they can live the lifestyle that they want? Because it is a shame that, you know, as we may make attempts to advance in our careers in hopes of more money and greater access to, you know, services, activities, you know, whatever it may be, material goods, that we may not even have the opportunity to enjoy them because work is exhausting us,
Right.
whether it
Or
be physically
consuming
or
us.
mentally, or consuming us. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
So now we probably have folks that are following that are wondering whether this is a program that they should jump into, right? Whether this is something that they want to pursue to help where they're at. So who would be an ideal participant for the services that you offer? And for folks that have participated in the past and have shared their feedback, what did they share? Like, how did they benefit from Center Joy Power?
so Center Joy Power is for professionals of color in any field. And, you know, I've had folks who were doctors, lawyers, professors, theologians, a whole cross section of folks within the tech industry, a number of fields that have participated in the program. So that's one thing. Secondly, a person of color who wants to reconnect with joy, and may have discovered that they have lost touch with the things that bring them joy. So the program is ideal for that individual. I think it's also great for those who may feel just emotionally, physically, spiritually drained. It's good for those leaders who may constantly be the one that everyone relies on, that they are so accustomed to having all the answers. They are accustomed to always being a source of support, and never taking a break. They are so used to being that rock, that pillar for everyone else, but they don't have that kind of support system. CenterJoyPWR really helps to create that space for folks who are so used to being the leader with no one to rely on or no one to lean on. Instead, they can have a space where they can explore, not have all the answers, and be okay with that. Be clumsy, while at the same time still, fully confident about the things that they most certainly know and are sure of, but be okay with not being so sure, not being the expert in the room, or not being expected to be the expert in the room. It's very good for those who are nurturers, that are so used to nurturing others, are really good at it, but aren't so great at nurturing themselves. And kind of like what you spoke about earlier, that, sometimes even feel guilty when they nurture themselves, or guilty when they experience joy. It's also really good for those who's just constantly worrying and can't turn the worry off. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
And then for past participants, what did they share based on how they've benefited from CenterJoyPWR?
I think the number one thing that many of past participants have spoken about is how they've arrived at a place where they can really welcome abundance, or welcome joy, and savor it. They are also at a place where they can slow down. The slow down and savor kind of go hand in hand with many of the clients that I've spoken to once they've finished the program, that they are able to really notice far more at the end of the program, notice things in their environment, but also notice things within their heart and spirit that they may not have paid attention to before at the beginning of the program. So I think something else that comes up amongst past participants is the idea of permission, that they're finally okay with giving themselves permission to do the things that they love, and that permission didn't have to come from anybody else, that they ultimately were in control of giving themselves permission to let go of whatever was weighing down on them, whatever was causing them to shrink in certain spaces, and be okay with letting go and expanding, and allowing their spirit to shine no matter what space they were in. So those are just a handful of the things that clients have shared with me.
Yeah, this is awesome. And I also wanted to touch on, as you're talking, that for the podcast and for anyone that ever listens to our episodes, Pilipinx and wellness may sometimes sound like we're marketing, but I want to say it's really beyond that. We're not only dissecting the things that affect our wellness as a community, but we're also sharing resources and tools out there that exist. And I think that's what makes our podcast, like a powerful thing for many, hopefully for generations to come, is to just know that any type of thing that you're dealing with that affects your own wellness, there are people in our community that are providing these types of services and support to help you work through it. And it's not just always a one size fits all. Not everyone can effectively, use talk therapy, even though that's also an important tool for some that need to use that modality. But there's just so many different modalities out there, and we just hope to expose you to all these different ways of working through that intergenerational trauma, those different things that challenge us as a community and challenge our own wellness. So Janet, I really want to thank you as being a part of that process.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Yes. And so aside from being a wellness practitioner, we know that you're also an ethnic studies professor at Napa Valley College and that you're an author. So what are some of the courses that you teach and some of the books that you've written? What content do you typically cover?
So as far as the courses I teach at Napa Valley College, I teach Ethnic Studies 1 and 2. And so these are basically survey and ethnic studies courses. I also teach Filipino American Studies, African American Studies, and a new course called Critical Mixed Race Studies. And that started last year, and we're about to have our second time offering it next month. And so, yeah, those are some of the courses that I've been teaching. I've been teaching at Napa Valley College now for I think I'm in my 18th year there. And before that, I was a high school teacher. I taught at Salesian High School, and that was where I taught social justice, history of Christianity, and algebra, and spoken word, and a few other things. And that was actually when I first began to offer an elective in ethnic studies.
Awesome. What are some of the books that you've written or that you author as well?
My first book is called Crushing Soft Rubies. This is my memoir. And this year I'm actually celebrating the 20th anniversary of that memoir. So I'm very happy and excited about that.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And the second one is Midnight Peaches, 2 O'Clock Patience. This is a collection of essays, short stories, and poems on womanhood and the spirit. The third one is an ebook called Male Strippers as Healers and Their MC as Griot, Why Magic Mike XXL is Deeper Than You Think. And then the last one that came out in 2019 is called To Black Parents Visiting Earth, Raising Black Children in the 21st Century.
Great. So if any of you want to read more of Janet's work, these are the several books out there for you to access more, of like what she can share with the community. Now, we're kind of reaching the end of the episode. And one thing that we typically like to ask our guests is what their own wellness routines and self-care practices consist of. You mentioned in the episode earlier that you like to do parkour as one of your things that bring you joy. So for your own wellness and self-care outside of offering your program through CenterJoyPWR, writing and teaching, what are other things that you dabble in?
I love to swim. I've probably been swimming longer than any of the other things that I'm doing right now. So I love to swim. Let's see. I love long walks, especially anywhere near a body of water. I love taking a long walk. I love beaches. I love walking along the shore. I am a big fan of pedicures and foot massages. And yeah, those are just a handful of the things I do for self-care. I also, this is a practice maybe I started a couple years ago. At bedtime, I will keep I have this basket of affirmation stones, and I keep it near the bed. And at bedtime, I will select a stone. I'll close my eyes, select a stone, and then just meditate on that stone. So on each of the stones, there is a particular word that is carved into it, whether it's love or peace or courage or whatever it may be. And so as I select that stone and sit at my bedside, I just kind of allow the images, words, sensations, whatever it is that it may be, to just bubble up on its own as I hold that word in my consciousness. And what I find is that it helps me to fall asleep. And then as I wake up, the word is still on my mind, and I find that I'm able to carry that word with me throughout the rest of the day. And so that has been another part of my self-care routine. And, in all honesty, it's not something that I do each and every single night. I probably should, but it is something that I do often enough throughout the week, anywhere from 3 to 5 times in the week. And it makes such a difference just in terms of my mood and my ability to get through the day with a more positive outlook throughout the day.
Thank you for sharing the different things that you do for your own self-care and wellness practice. I think it's important, and the biggest takeaway is that from this question is that the guests that we have on, they also have their own practice, right? They practice what they preach. And it's just good to come up with just different ways to present to our community how you can incorporate self-care and wellness into your life. And hopefully, based on what our guests share on the podcast, you can find one that aligns with what brings you joy and fulfillment. Now, as we begin to close, how can our community find you if they have additional questions or would like to sign up for your program, Janet?
So folks can find me at janetstickmon.com. That's Janet, Stickmon. .com, and on my website you'll find out all of my information about how to gain access to CenterJoyPWR program. You'll find information about my books, but also some free resources as well, different articles that I've written, as well as different meditations that have been posted there. So there's also a contact page if folks want to get in contact with me through the website. They can access that page on that website. They can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Janet Stickmon. Again, that's at Janet and then Stickmon, and that's all across the board. And lastly, if anyone wants to shoot me a message, they can either DM me on Instagram or email me at hello@janetstickmon.com.
All right. Thank you, Janet, for talking to our community about healing racial battle fatigue. We thank you for sharing your services with us, not just to equip our community with strategies to address their experiences of racism, but also colorism, microaggressions, but to overall just fill their life with more joy. We look forward to witnessing your journey unfold and supporting your work in the process.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for having me. It's an honor.
It's an honor for us. And to our community, for our next episode, we'll be talking to Roque Bucton about ability advocacy. This episode will air on Wellness Wednesday, March 13. As we close, we'd like to acknowledge once again our guest speaker, Janet Stickmon, our graphic designer and beat maker for our opening and closing track, Richie, Freddie, Joachim, for consent to use the first part of your instrumental track, Hear It From You, that you heard during our break, our advisors, Allison De La Cruz, Rian De Los Reyes, and Safo Teologo, our community partners, This Filipino American Life, SoCal Filipinos, and Trek Table, and really all of our community members for your shares and support. As always, we'll share more about our guest speakers' offerings on our Instagram stories and highlights for permanent access with any of their upcoming events. Be sure to follow us at Pilipinx in Wellness on Instagram, Threads, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, and on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Pilipinx, the letter N, followed by the letters N and S. Don't forget to continue to hit like and subscribe on our Pilipinx in Wellness YouTube channel. Thank you for always believing in us. Be well, everyone. Continue to take care of yourselves and each other.
Thank you, and salamat, Cheryl.
Salamat gid.